thank the first proposition for his speech. And now to open the case for the opposition, I call upon Azad Rehan.
I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Proposition thinks that they can use fancy phrases to cover up their lack of knowledge for the real world. They gave out mischaracterizations of this debate of certain important issues. For example, they gave us the definition of dying for the country as they took the definition of dying for the country quite literally, and we think that that's quite unfair. Why is that so? Because we feel that phrases can have different interpretations. For example, when you're saying good luck to someone and you say break a leg, you don't literally mean that you want them to break the leg, right? That means that these phrases have different interpretations and people within this world interpret these phrases differently. We at side opposition feel that dying for the country means that you're willing to contribute to the country, prioritizing country's interests over your own personal interests. Secondly, sacrificing your time, money, etc., or sacrificing your time, money, etc., or in extreme limited cases, even dying for your country. But we feel that that is not the realistic definition that side proposition gave to us. The first idea was that army and government is legitimized. And that is the reason why people don't question the policies of army and military can use that for their own personal narratives. 3 responses. Number 1, we feel that their whole idea is contingent upon the fact that every person within this world will interpret this particular phrase radically, and that is problematic. But secondly, we feel that people are going to be more aware when there is such a strong involvement with the country. That is to say that if you care about your country, that any actor, even your army or your government that is actively trying to harm your country, you're more likely to question that particular actor. So that means that you will have more of an incentive on our side of the model to question such actors. But thirdly, they gave us the idea that politicians and governments use this for their personal interests. The assumption here is that this motion only applies to the rest of the population and doesn't apply to these politicians or these military bases, etc. And we feel that this side proposition is actually running a defensive case, and because of this ideology, we feel that this motion applies to all stakeholders of this debate. Or to all stakeholders of this debate. And we feel that by that all of their harms fall, all of their benefits fall off. Sit down. We feel that historically a lack of prioritization of country has massive harms. For example, regional conflicts, lack of political growth, etc. because the fact that people prioritize their self-interest over the country's welfare. And that is detrimental to the country's growth and reduces collective uplifting of the population within the country. First line of argument. Why this phrase led to the end of colonialism, the very idea that they presented to us. Firstly, why colonialism happened in the first place and prolonged for so long. We feel that colonialism was formed because of colonizers such as the East India Company, etc., who came into India for their own personal benefits and did it to exploit countries, meaning that they exploited the country's vulnerability, etc. How this led to certain irreversible harms. Firstly, people were scared of these colonizers, etc., and were for their own selfish interests, for example, their own individual survival, didn't sacrifice themselves for the country. Secondly, colonizers actively exploited the vulnerability of these people. How this phrase led to the reduction, or how this phrase was important and led to the reduction of colonialism. We feel that people like Martin Luther King, people like Gandhi, Mandela, etc., were willing to sacrifice their own lives for the collective interests of their country, and they had massive support of the masses because they wanted to free themselves from this oppression. This ideology was internalized on a mass level, and people were willing to prioritize the country over their self, and that led to the end of colonialization or reduced the effects of colonialism on these people. If people like Gandhi, etc., didn't internalize these particular ideologies, etc., then in their side of the model, they would be sitting in their houses, chilling, and not caring about the country. And we feel that that is pretty problematic. Moving over to my second line of argument, the idea of collective identity. We feel that countries have heterogeneous identities of different people. That is to say that these people within these countries have different religious, gender, social, regional differences, etc. That leads to individual aspects within these people, meaning that people prioritize their own interests over their country's interests, etc. And that leads to infighting and internal conflicts within these countries and within these regions. For example, countries like Pakistan have different provinces, etc., that are in conflict with each other. That is to say that people of Punjab are not caring about people of KPK, Sindh, etc., and that leads to unequal growth of these regions, and people on a very large scale are impacted. Secondly, we feel that everyone has equal rights and no person should be unfairly disadvantaged, and that can only be achieved when the entire population identifies as a singular identity. The impact of this is the benefit of this ideology is on two levels. Number one, on a moral level, we feel that some sort of interdependency is created which ensures harmony within these regions, meaning that people are more likely to cater to each other's interests, etc. And secondly, less infighting, meaning that there are going to be comparatively less regional or provincial conflicts within these countries, and that is very good because of the fact that we're saving lives on a very large scale. Moving over to my third line of argument. Before I do that, sure, ma'am.
People of different areas and provinces are segregated without your policy. With your policy, what then brings together the global community to make sure they don't involve themselves in conflict?
We don't feel that that is true. We don't feel that that is true, ma'am, because understand that these people then identify as a collective unit. In your model, these people within these countries are going to have different ideologies, etc. Only one different ideologies, etc. This ideology simply brings these people together on a large scale. So that problem you're identifying is exacerbated on your side of the model. Third argument, how it maintains stability and peace in the longer run. What do these developing countries look like? Number one, internal fighting or sabotaging people for their own individual interests due to extremist sects, etc. Meaning that likeliness of civil wars, etc. within these countries such as Haiti, Congo, Africa, etc. are more. Secondly, we feel that these particular wars, internal wars, etc. are prolonged because of the fact that these militant groups within these countries have extremist ideologies. For example, suicide bombers, etc. And that is problematic because that means that there is going to be heavy reliance on manpower to counter these particular problems because these countries do not have enough resources, etc. to counter these particular problems. Secondly, how does this frame then help this cause? We feel that when you prioritize the well-being of the country over your own benefit, you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the country. For example, your time, life, or assets, etc. And B, we feel that they're going to be less likely to be deterred by these consequences. For example, Pakistanis don't care about death as long as an entire country is being benefited, and that is good because without this phrase existing, we feel that less people are going to be joining forces that directly cater to the country's interests, meaning that on a comparative there is going to be less interest, and that will lead to less stability within these regions. In our model, we are catering for greater stability to contain such conflicts, and that is the only way to contain such terrorist attacks within these countries, proxy wars from west, or prevent certain external attacks, etc. Moving over to my fourth line of argument, how it encourages patriotism and develops the country. What is the essence of this phrase or ideology? We feel that you prioritize the benefit of the entire country over your own personal benefits. Meaning that this looks like people giving up high-paying jobs to stay in their country or caring more about their countrymen, etc. For example, people dying in human experiments to further medicine testing, etc. Or secondly, Karagaram Highway construction, where hundreds of people were sacrificed, but trade worth of billions was achieved, which comparatively helped a lot more people. Thirdly, we feel that people within these countries do not want to go to war because that could lead to the death of others on a large scale, meaning they compromise the quality of life of other people. So when this phrase, so meaning that people are more likely to hold politicians such as Musharraf, etc., accountable because the fact that Musharraf went to Kargil wall for publicity for his own selfish interests. So people in our side of the model are more likely to hold these politicians accountable. People in our side of the model are more likely to cater for collective interests of other individuals within this society. Because the fact that we're not running a defensive case, and because the fact that we're catering to a large majority of the people, and we have several different impacts where they only have one narrow line of argument, we feel for those reasons, give it to side ISM.